When a plane goes down, there is often almost nothing left to bury.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent towards Amsterdam Schiphol Airport.
One of the 10 stars in this video was buried in a rubber bag. Another has no grave anywhere on Earth. A third was lost in transit on the way to his own funeral. These are the graves of 10 Hollywood stars killed in plane crashes. Number 10. Carole Lombard. Carole Lombard lies in the Sanctuary of Trust inside the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Her marker reads Carole Lombard Gable. She is between her mother on one side and Clark Gable on the other, and the public cannot reach any of them because the Great Mausoleum has been closed to general visitors for generations. She was one of the finest comic actresses Hollywood ever produced, brilliant in My Man Godfrey and 20th Century, and for a period the highest paid star in the industry. She was 33 years old. On January 16, 1942, 6 weeks after Pearl Harbor, she was flying home from a war bond rally in Indiana, where she had raised over $2 million in a single evening. TWA Flight 3 refueled in Las Vegas and took off at 7 minutes past 7 in the evening. 13 minutes later, it flew directly into a cliff near the top of Potosi Mountain. All 22 people on board were killed instantly, including her mother and 15 Army servicemen. Clark Gable traveled to Nevada and waited at a hotel while the recovery party climbed the mountain. The bodies had to be hoisted up a 400-foot cliff, loaded onto mountain ponies, and carried out through waist-deep snow. Lombard had left written instructions for her own burial years earlier. She wanted a swift, private interment in a mausoleum crypt with only immediate family present. The Army offered a full military funeral for the first American star to die aiding the war effort. Her family refused it and followed her instructions exactly. Gable bought 3 crypts, one for her, one for her mother, and one he kept empty for 18 years until he needed it. He never fully recovered. At 41, he enlisted in the Army Air Forces and flew combat missions over Europe. Number 9. Will Rogers. Will Rogers is not buried in a cemetery. He lies in a tomb on the grounds of the Will Rogers Memorial Museum in Claremore, Oklahoma, on land he bought himself and intended to retire on. Every year on the anniversary of his death, the museum holds a wreath laying at the tomb and a pilot performs a flyover. Rogers was, at the time of his death, arguably the most famous American alive. He was a Cherokee cowboy from Indian Territory who became a rope trick artist, then a Ziegfeld Follies star, then a syndicated newspaper columnist, then a radio broadcaster, then one of the highest paid film actors in Hollywood. The New York Times called him the most famous and best loved American citizen. He served as honorary mayor of Beverly Hills. He was also one of the loudest public champions of aviation in America, constantly urging people to fly and writing about air travel in his columns. On August 15, 1935, he was flying through Alaska with the aviator Wiley Post, a close friend, in an experimental aircraft Post had built himself by bolting the fuselage of one Lockheed to the wings of another and fitting oversized pontoons. They landed in a lagoon near Point Barrow to ask directions. Seal hunters pointed them north. The plane took off, went into a spin almost immediately, and crashed. Both men died on impact. Rogers was 55. Both houses of Congress suspended business. A monument was later built near the crash site in Alaska from stone quarried in Claremore, so that the place he died and the place he lies would be made of the same rock. 2 airports in Oklahoma carry the names of the 2 men who died in that lagoon. Number 8. Leslie Howard. Leslie Howard has no grave. There is no headstone, no crypt, no ashes, and no plot anywhere in the world. His body was never recovered, and Find a Grave lists him under a category almost no film star occupies: lost at sea during the Second World War. He is commemorated only on war memorials. Howard is permanently known as Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind and was nominated for Academy Awards for Berkeley Square and Pygmalion. He was a genuine transatlantic star who walked away from a lucrative Hollywood contract to return to Britain and work for the war effort, making propaganda films and radio broadcasts aimed at persuading a still neutral America to enter the war. On June 1st, 1943, he boarded BOAC Flight 777 in Lisbon, bound for England. It was an unarmed civilian DC-3 flying a scheduled route from neutral Portugal. Somewhere over the Bay of Biscay, 8 German Junkers Ju-88 fighters intercepted it and shot it into the Atlantic. Everyone aboard was killed. Because of the war, no recovery operation was ever mounted. The reason has been argued about ever since. One theory holds that a German agent in Lisbon saw a heavy-set man smoking a cigar board the plane and reported that Winston Churchill was aboard. Another, argued in a book by Howard's own son, is that the Germans targeted Howard himself to damage British morale. A third is simply that the Ju-88s were escorting U-boats and shot down what they found. Howard had served in the trenches in the First World War and was invalided out in 1916 with shell shock. A doctor suggested acting as therapy. That advice produced one of the most recognizable faces in cinema, and there is nowhere on earth to stand and remember him. NUMBER 7 Mike Todd. Mike Todd was buried in Plot 66 of the Beth Aaron section of Jewish Waldheim Cemetery in Forest Park, Illinois, beside his father. He is not there now. Where he is now has never been made public. Todd was one of the biggest producers in Hollywood. He won the Academy Award for Best Picture for Around the World in 80 Days, developed the widescreen Todd AO format, and in 1957 married Elizabeth Taylor. He was the only one of her husbands she never divorced. On March 22, 1958, his private Lockheed Lodestar, which he had named the Lucky Liz, iced over crossing the mountains and went down near Grants, New Mexico. Taylor was supposed to be on that flight. Todd had refused to let her come because she was ill with the flu. He was 48. The plane exploded on impact. He could only be identified from dental records and his wedding ring. What was recovered was placed in a rubber bag, sealed in Albuquerque, and buried in a bronze coffin in Illinois. On the weekend of June 25, 1977, 19 years later, thieves moved a granite headstone weighing several hundred pounds, dug down 4.5 feet, opened the coffin, and took the bag. A rumor had circulated that Taylor had placed a $100,000 diamond ring on his finger before burial. There was no ring. Taylor had visited that grave the day before on a stopover at O'Hare and left roses. The remains were recovered days later under leaves near the plot. His son had them reburied in an undisclosed location. The private investigator who located the bag, Anthony Pellicano, used the publicity to build a career as Hollywood's most feared fixer, and decades later went to federal prison. Number 6. Buddy Holly. Buddy Holly is buried in the city of Lubbock Cemetery in Lubbock, Texas, beside his mother and father. The headstone carries a carved guitar, and fans leave guitar picks on it. It also carries a name that is not the one on his records. The stone reads Holly. That was the family spelling. In 1956, Decca Records typed it wrong on his first contract, and he decided not to argue. The misspelling made him famous, and the correction is on his grave. Holly was 22 years old. In roughly 18 months, he wrote and recorded That'll Be the Day, Peggy Sue, Every Day, Oh Boy, and Rave On, and effectively invented the template of the self-contained rock band. He had been married for less than 6 months. On February 3, 1959, after a show in Clear Lake, Iowa, he chartered a small plane rather than face another night on a freezing tour bus. The aircraft went down in a field minutes after takeoff. Ritchie Valens and J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, died with him, along with the 21-year-old pilot. Valens had won his seat on a coin toss. The crash became known as the day the music died. Holly's widow, pregnant at the time, learned about his death from a television news report and later suffered a miscarriage. She did not attend the funeral and has never visited the grave. The cemetery has since put up a signpost pointing visitors to it, which is unusual because most of the 60,000 graves around him belong to ordinary residents of Lubbock. Ritchie Valens lies in California and the Big Bopper in Texas, hundreds of miles apart. Number 5. Otis Redding. Otis Redding is buried on his own land. His grave is on the grounds of the Big O Ranch in Round Oak, Georgia, the 300-acre property he bought in 1965 when the money started arriving. It is private family property and it is not open to the public. Find a Grave lists the estate itself as the cemetery, with one memorial recorded there, and photo requests are not permitted. Redding was 26. He came out of the housing projects of Macon, dropped out of school in the 10th grade, and worked as a driver for Little Richard's old band before anyone let him sing. By 1967, he had recorded Try a Little Tenderness, I've Been Loving You Too Long, and written Respect, which Aretha Franklin would take and turn into something else entirely. On December 10, 1967, his twin-engine Beechcraft flew into fog and rain over Wisconsin and went down into the freezing water of Lake Monona, 4 miles short of the runway in Madison. Redding and 6 others were killed. 1 member of his band survived. 3 days before the crash, he had finished recording a song he was not sure about, a slower and stranger thing than anything he had done, with whistling at the end because the lyrics were unfinished. Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay was released a month after he was buried. It went to number 1, the first posthumous chart topper in American history, and won 2 Grammy Awards. 4,500 people filled Macon City Auditorium for the funeral. His widow Zelma never remarried. She still lives on the ranch, still controls the estate, and has spent nearly 60 years running the foundation that carries his name. Number 4. Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy is buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, near the Memorial Amphitheater. His is the second most visited grave in the entire cemetery, behind only John F. Kennedy. So many people come that the pathway was rebuilt with a bend in it to accommodate the crowds at the corner plot. The headstones of Medal of Honor recipients at Arlington are normally lettered in gold leaf. Murphy left instructions that his was not to be. He wanted a stone identical to every other veteran around him. His marker is plain and it carries the wrong birth year because he had lied about his age to enlist at 17 and the false date followed him into the ground. Murphy was the most decorated American combat soldier of the Second World War. At 19, he held off an entire German unit alone for an hour from the top of a burning tank destroyer. Asked about it afterwards, he said they were killing his friends. James Cagney brought into Hollywood and he made over 40 films, including To Hell and Back, in which he played himself. He spent his later life with severe post-traumatic stress, sleeping with a loaded pistol under his pillow, and campaigned publicly for veterans' mental health treatment decades before anyone else in America would say the words out loud. He turned down alcohol and cigarette advertising money while deep in debt because he did not want to set an example. On May 28, 1971, a private plane carrying him crashed into Brush Mountain near Roanoke, Virginia, in fog and rain. He was 45. 6 others died with him. It was the second aircraft to crash on that mountain within 14 hours. He had flown his own planes for years, but that day he was only a passenger. Number 3. Ricky Nelson. Ricky Nelson is buried in the Revelation section at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills, on a steep slope 2 rows above his parents, Ozzie and Harriet. The stone does not say Ricky Nelson. It carries his real name, Eric Hilliard Nelson. He had been famous since he was 8 years old, playing a version of himself on his family's radio and television show, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, in front of an audience that watched him grow up in real time. He had a number 1 record at 17 with Poor Little Fool, followed by Travelin' Man and Hello Mary Lou, and acted opposite John Wayne and Dean Martin in Rio Bravo. On December 31, 1985, his aging Douglas DC-3 caught fire in flight over Texas on the way to a New Year's Eve show in Dallas. The pilots put it down in a field and the aircraft burned. Nelson, his fiancée, 4 members of his band and his sound technician were killed. Both pilots got out. He was 45. A rumor spread almost immediately that the fire had been started by passengers freebasing cocaine. It followed him for years. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation found the cause was a faulty cabin heater. Then something happened that has almost no parallel in Hollywood. His remains were lost in transit between Texas and California, and the funeral had to be postponed for days while they were located. 250 mourners eventually filled the Church of the Hills. The last song he ever sang on stage was Buddy Holly's Rave On. His twin sons, Gunnar and Matthew, reached #1 in 1990, making the Nelsons the only American family with 3 generations of chart-topping artists. Number 2. Dean Paul Martin. Dean Paul Martin is buried at Los Angeles National Cemetery, a veterans cemetery on Sepulveda Boulevard, under a standard military marker. His father, Dean Martin, lies about 2 miles away at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park, in one of the most visited celebrity cemeteries in the world. The 2 of them are in different grounds, and almost every visitor who goes to see the father never learns the son is nearby. Dean Paul was a professional tennis player who competed at Wimbledon as a junior, then an actor. He was nominated for a Golden Globe for Players opposite Ali McGraw and starred in the television series Misfits of Science. He was married to Olivia Hussey and later to the Olympic figure skater Dorothy Hamill. He also got his pilot's license at 16 and in 1981 was commissioned as an officer in the California Air National Guard. He wanted to be something other than Dean Martin's son. On March 21, 1987, he took off from March Air Force Base in an F-4C Phantom on a routine training flight with his weapons officer, Captain Ramon Ortiz. A snowstorm closed in. A controller radioed a course change to avoid San Gorgonio Mountain, the highest peak in Southern California. The jet dropped 4,000 feet and struck the mountainside at around 400 miles an hour. Investigators concluded he had lost spatial orientation in the cloud. Neither man attempted to eject. He was 35. Fighter jets flew over the funeral. Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Jerry Lewis, and Lucille Ball were among the 200 mourners. Dean Martin never recovered. Friends said the man who had built an entire career on looking untroubled simply stopped trying, and he withdrew almost completely for the 8 years he had left. Number 1. Aaliyah. Aaliyah rests in a private alcove in the Rosewood Mausoleum at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, roughly 25 miles north of Manhattan. Her family bought a private space rather than a standard crypt, and her father was later placed above her. Ferncliff does not permit photo requests for the memorial, and the alcove sits outside any public route through the building. She was 22. She had released 3 albums, sold more than 24 million records, and made the jump to film in Romeo Must Die and Queen of the Damned. Almost everyone in the industry considered her to be at the beginning of something rather than the middle. On August 25, 2001, she finished filming a music video on Abaco Island in the Bahamas and boarded a small Cessna to Florida. The aircraft was carrying more people and more equipment than it was rated for, and the pilot was not properly certified. It went down within seconds of leaving the runway. Aaliyah and 8 others were killed. Her funeral procession in Manhattan used 22 white doves, 1 for each year of her life. Ferncliff itself holds an extraordinary number of famous dead, including Judy Garland, Malcolm X, Basquiat, and Joan Crawford, and it is one of the few major cemeteries in America that actively discourages celebrity grave tourism. The result is that one of the most recognizable faces of her generation lies in a building thousands of people pass in a corner nobody is directed to. The pilot's toxicology results and the aircraft's weight were both raised in the litigation that followed, and the case was eventually settled out of court. 10 people, 10 aircraft. And in almost every case, the hardest part was not the crash. It was what happened afterwards. A coffin dug open in Illinois. A body lost in transit between two states. A stretch of ocean with no marker on it. A father and a son in separate cemeteries 2 miles apart. Which of these 10 graves surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments.